Okay, so we are in Ezra. I know that we were in Ezekiel, and so it doesn't really seem to make sense that we're almost working backwards. But our Bibles, unless you happen to have a chronological Bible that you study from, they're not in chronological order. Ezra's ministry and the events that are described in there, they generally come after the time of Ezekiel. And so do the events that are in Nehemiah. Now, many scholars would even place Ezra after Nehemiah. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. But, Ezekiel, we remember he was a prophet during the Babylonian exile, received the call in the 5th year of the king, and King Jehoiakim in 592, remained active until around 570. And Ezra, he arrives in Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes I. Now, in the book of Esther, you will have King Ahasuerus, who is also given the name Xerxes. So that Xerxes and Artaxerxes I, they are not the same. Okay? Two different kings. So you've got Ezra there. Nehemiah, his role in rebuilding Jerusalem and its walls, they fall after Ezekiel's time. And so there is some chronological issues there. So here, when we get to Ezra, we're looking at the restoration of the temple, right? So we're coming in. We're just going to kind of go through it as quickly as we can. But Jeremiah, he testifies, if you will, to the 7 decades of Babylonian captivity as a vindication of God's character and his punishment for the wickedness of Judah. You look over in Jeremiah chapter 25 and verse 11, this whole land will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. He also foretold the removal of Babylon's yoke on Judah. That's there in Jeremiah 25, verse 12, up through verse 14, and then also in Jeremiah 29:10. So over a century before Cyrus was born, and we're going to get to him in just a moment, but over a century before Cyrus was born, God called him by name and vowed that he would be his vessel for the rebuilding of the temple. You might want to jot down Isaiah chapter 48, or I'm sorry, Isaiah 44. I know, I'm sure that I made someone scribble on that one. But Isaiah 44 and verse 28, it is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid. So that's over a century before he is even born. And then around 539 BC, Persia conquers Babylon. And the consummation of the Babylonian captivity ends around 536. And Cyrus decrees that all of the captives, all of those who had been taken by Babylon, who want to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, they could. Those who choose to remain in Babylon, they were instructed to aid those that were returning with certain provisions for their personal needs and for the reconstruction of the temple. Let's just go ahead and look in Ezra chapter 1, where we have this proclamation, beginning in verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, which we just looked at, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. And just to pause there very quickly, is the writing would have been in multiple languages. Okay, we see this in the book of Esther, when Haman is saying, look, the Jews, they don't worship you. You've got Mordecai, he's kind of a problem child over here. And so a decree is sent out that the Jews are to be killed. And it's sent out in all of these different languages. So it's not just one language. This is a language that everybody would have understood. It would have been Babylonian. It would have been Hebrew. It would have been Aramaic. It would have been perhaps even Egyptian, depending on how far it went. But it would have been in Persian, of course. But thus says this, so this is the decree. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Every survivor, at whatever place he may live, let the men of that place support him with silver and gold, with goods and cattle, together with a free will offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. Now, is there anything in particular that you might notice there in verse 4 of Ezra chapter 1? It might not jump out at you, right? But you look at the end of verse 4, so the people, in supporting the work, were to give a free will offering. Okay? Now, prior to that, we have, the 10% tithe, if you will. You're looking at Abraham and Melchizedek. And we know that it wasn't, just 10% of money. It was 10% of, well, pretty much everything, and actually equated to anywhere from 60 to 80% of a person's possessions and income and what have you. So here, at this point, after coming out of captivity, there's not some 10% thing going on. This is a free will offering. Whatever you want to give, whatever you can give, well, that's what you're encouraged to give. But there's not going to be a law saying you have to give this particular percentage, right? And so we have the decree. So if you want to go back to Jerusalem and build the temple of God and rebuild Jerusalem, you're welcome to do that. If you're not going to go, then at least support those who do, right? Now, what might be something that we can maybe make a little bit of a modern application here with this? Any thoughts?
Missionary work?
Missionary work, exactly. It's like, so we have missionaries who they go out, they sow the seed, they plant congregations and what have you, right? They're going out. Now, I can't go or I don't want to go, whatever the case may be. But if I'm not doing that, then I can at least, and I should at least, support the work that they're doing, right? To whatever degree is possible. And I know that many times in congregations, it'll be looked at as a congregational thing. It's going to be a line item in the budget, and we have this missionary over here in Honduras, this one in Ukraine, this one, in Cape Town, this one over here, and this is how we support as a congregation, right? If a congregation's not supporting mission work, though, don't think that just because a congregation as a whole's not, that doesn't mean that you can't individually, right? You find their supporting congregation and you send whatever funds and have it earmarked for them, and it'll get to them. But we have to be supportive of mission work. Now, that being said, mission work is not just overseas or just across the border. Mission work is across the street too, right? And at some point, I read a report, I think it was a Pew Research study, and they said by 2030, it's very possible that the African continent will be sending missionaries over here to evangelize to us in the United States. Just because of how weak, in general, the church has become, Christianity, Christendom has become, and what have you. And all you got to do is just, get on YouTube and you can see how some of these preachers act, I think the most brazen one was Stephen Furtick when he got the water gun and used that to baptize the first few rows and said the Holy Spirit told him to do it. Yeah. Don't worry. I will never do that. I will never do anything like that. Don't worry. So he issues this decree. Cyrus gave them the vessels of the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had taken and had placed in the house of his gods. You look there in verse 7 of Ezra chapter 1. King Cyrus brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and put in the house of his gods. So it wasn't as though, he just sacked Jerusalem, took it and sold it off and increased his own treasuries. Is that he said, oh, well, these things look nice. How about we go ahead and put them in, the temples of my God over here. Right? And so he had done that, and Cyrus says, no, take that back. And obviously they're going to be clean, but they had been sanctified for temple use in the worship and service to God. Their very presence in the house of a Babylonian idol was really an expression of God's holiness, His righteousness, and His justice, a symbol of Judah's sin, and the inability of God's character to abide in sin. So there are all these underlying things that are going on, right? That we as people, even if we had boots on the ground during this time, we would not understand what it is that's happening. But God does. And so there is a symbolism here of, yes, Judah is sacked because of the sin of the people and how they're acting. Nebuchadnezzar, he takes these things that are in God's house, he puts them in the houses of his idols, but at some point they're going to be taken out because God cannot dwell approvingly within the presence of sinful behavior. Now I know that many people, they'll look and they'll say, well, God can't look on sin, right? That's what the scriptures say. But the meaning behind that is that God cannot look on sin with approval, right? And so them being taken out, there's the symbolism behind that of God not dwelling in the tents of the wicked. And it's also it's a reproach to God, to Judah and truth. Their return, there's indignity is symbolized with restoration of divine favor with the nation. Any thoughts or comments so far? We're still just kind of waking up, maybe, right? I guess there's no donuts because there's a potluck later, but I don't think anybody wants chili for breakfast. Even I'm not that brave. So then the exiles, there's about 50,000 of them under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Jeshua, or Yeshua, not Yeshua, Jesus. They leave Babylon for their home in Canaan. And in chapter 2 and verse 1, we see how they're described. These are the people of the province who came up out of the captivity of the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away to Babylon and returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his city. And so you can read through there, and you've got the sons, and you've got the numbers, and adding everything up, you've got around 50 30,000 there. They had left Persian soil, but they hadn't left Persian dominion. Okay? So, I think perhaps the closest way that I could describe it is, and even this is not a good way, is an American embassy in a foreign country, right? You are not technically on American soil in the sense that you're within, the continental United States. But you are in, for that little area. So they were leaving the soil of Persia, the land of Persia, but they were still under Persian rule. Does that make sense? Yeah, that embassy thing was kind of a horrible example, right? I'm working on the sleep thing too. They were free, but they were not free, right? They were still accountable to Cyrus being king in Persia, and that reality they would soon experience that when they start to work on the temple, and really that points to the lingering effects of sin. The involvement of sin, or the commission of sin, the inaction of sin, it may involve only a moment, but its consequences, even met with forgiveness, may last a lifetime, depending on what that sin is, right? That one sin, it might just take a moment of a life, but its effects are far-reaching, even if God intervenes. Now, that doesn't mean that God can't intervene again and use things for His glory. He certainly can. But so there's that's going in there, and in the process of numbering out the families and all of that, Ezra chapter 2 and verse 21 makes reference to the city of Bethlehem. The men of Bethlehem, 123, it says there, the home of Israel's second king, King David. Let's see here. 1 Samuel chapter 16. Sticking together on me. 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 through 13. I'll just read it very quickly. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse, the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." But Samuel said, "How can I go? When Saul hears of it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. You shall invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate to you." So Samuel did what the Lord said and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the city came trembling to meet him and said, "Do you come in peace?" He said, "In peace I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." He also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they entered, he looked at Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as a man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Now Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen these." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Are these all the children?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he is tending the sheep." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and bring him in, for we will not sit down until he comes here." So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ready, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose and went to Ramah. So we've got some ties here in that, people come, the men of Bethlehem coming out of captivity. They are going to where the first king is, the second king technically, and where of course Christ will be born. And so the birthplace of Christ there in Luke chapter 2 verses 1 through 7. Who would later occupy the spiritual house of David. If you look over in Acts chapter 2, probably one of the most famous chapters in Acts, if not the most famous, I should say. Acts chapter 2, verses 29 and 30. Behold, brethren, I may confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And so, because he was a prophet and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne. So we have the birthplace of David, the birthplace of Christ, who's later going to occupy the spiritual throne of David. And then in verse 23 of Ezra chapter 2, Anathoth, that's a reference to the home of Jeremiah. While Jeremiah was in prison, God informed him that his uncle was going to approach him with the request that he purchase the field in this area. And then when that happens, Jeremiah, he perceives that the transaction was the will of God. And in the presence of the witnesses, let's describe the book of the purchase, all the Jews and what have you. You can just jot down Jeremiah 32 and verse 12. Any thoughts, comments? Sure. No? Okay. So, now Jeremiah, he preached to Judah for 40 years before Babylonian captivity. The nation, it was so steeped in sin as to make the repentance on a Nineveh-like scale impossible. Right? Judah, she looked at her idols, declared her love for them. It was described as futile, Jeremiah's efforts to try to get Judah to alter the course. Jeremiah in the belly of Jonah's fish couldn't have softened the heart of Judah. Jeremiah's
Could you say that one more time?
If Jeremiah were in the belly of Jonah's fish, even that wouldn't have softened the heart of Judah. Basically, Judah was worse than Nineveh was in their sin. Right? And we've got Jonah, and he's told to go to Nineveh, and he flees, and next thing you know, he's in the belly of a great fish, but he ends up going to Nineveh, and we know that Nineveh repents, because even Jesus speaks of the people of Nineveh rising up and judging that generation, for having the son there and not listening to him. And the idea is such that Judah is so steeped in sin that, what's going on? I'm just making noises. That Judah is so steeped in sin that, that even Nineveh pales in comparison. Which is, that's saying something right there. I mean, really.
That should be an encouragement to us, because he taught for 40 years and it fell on deaf ears, so to speak. And, you know, as Christians, we have to keep persevering to reach people, whether they reject us or stop talking to us, or, you know, however they happen to react when we try to lead them to Christ and not give up. I mean, 40 years, that's a long time to persevere.
Absolutely. I mean, look at, Noah, right? He's called a preacher of righteousness, and he's preaching for over 100 years, and not a single convert, I mean, man, if he were a preacher in today's time, he probably would have been fired 20 times over, you know what I mean? It's like, Noah, it's just not working out here at the congregation. You're going to have to kind of move on down the line. But no, you're absolutely right. It should be an encouragement to us. Things work themselves out in God's time, not in ours. And at the same time, that can also be extremely difficult. Because, we have family members, we have friends, and, loved ones, and coworkers, and all of this, and we'll talk to them about God, and about the Bible, and about sin, and heaven, and hell, and, talk to them about all these different things, but then they just don't seem to pay attention, right? And, so for many people, that can become discouraging, and they just say, you know what, they throw up their hands and say, you know what, I'm just done. I'm not going to, I can't do it anymore. I can't take it anymore, right? But the reality is, we are to just persevere. Right? One plants, another waters, God gives the increase, Absolutely right. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think this is the scripture I've been trying to remember. Here in Ezekiel 3:16, God says to Ezekiel, "Son of man, I have appointed you a watchman to the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you will surely die, and you do not warn him, or speak out to warn the wicked from his wickedness way, that he may live, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I shall, but his blood I will require at your hand." But anyway, the idea is, he had to go. Some of the people were not going to listen, but if he went, he had done what the Lord had asked him to do.
No, absolutely. I mean, that person who doesn't listen, they're going to die in their iniquity. They're going to be punished for it. But if we don't say anything, if we don't do anything, following the commission in Matthew 28 and 19 and following, then we're not doing what God has asked us to do. Right? It's I can't remember the name of that hymn, but it's like you never talk to him.
Mention him, David.
Yeah, And, we have to wonder, what is it that's most important to us? Because we are really in a subject of evangelism to a degree with this, and talking to people and they're not listening, what have you. What is more important to us? If we believe what the Bible says about hell, right? Eternal torment, weeping and gnashing of teeth, fire that cannot be quenched, even though those are, really terms for us to kind of comprehend. Absent from the love of God and only receiving the wrath of God. If we truly believe that, then how can we not say anything to anyone? How can we say, well, my relationship with them here on this earth for however long, let's say it's a child, and let's say you're living to your 70s, let's just say. So, my relationship with them for the last 50 years, that's more important than them being with God for eternity. I'd rather have them here then, you know, for this little bit of time, than be with them, you know, forever, right? And so why is it that, well, I mean, there's several different reasons to why people don't evangelize. I mean, it could be fear. It could be that they've been tired of being rejected. You know, maybe they don't like talking to other people. Maybe they just don't know what to say and things like that. And we are on Wednesday night, when we finish the Psalms that we're going through, going to look at evangelism and kind of having those everyday conversations with people. Bible studies are great. A lot of Bible study programs out there. Y'all, how many of y'all maybe remember the old Jewel Miller film strips and stuff? Yeah, you know. So there's those, and there's several others. But here's the thing: sharing the gospel is not just a Bible study. Right? I mean, there's an initial conversation that has to take place to even get them interested in sitting down to study. And so that's something that we'll be looking at that. Good thoughts? Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. You know what? Even though it's just about 2 or 3 minutes early, we'll go ahead and end the class here, because I don't want to get in the middle of another section. And next week we'll start talking about pure worship. But thank you all very much.